InvestorIdeas.com podcast.
Good afternoon and welcome to another episode of InvestorIdeas.com podcasts. In today's podcast, we're going to be looking at a few public and private company announcements, looking at Micron Waste Technologies Incorporated, trading on the CSE as MWM and the OTC as MICWF, as well as also looking at new private company Gallery Brands, as well as new FDA regulations, and Canopy Rivers trading on the TSX as RIV and the OTC as CNPOF, as well as Acreage Holdings Incorporated trading on the CSE as ACRG.U and the OTCQX as ACRGF. So first starting with Micron Waste Technologies Incorporated, who announced that further to its news release on April 20th and May 19th of this year that the company has now completed the acquisition of all the issued and outstanding shares of COVID Technologies Incorporated pursuant to the terms of the share exchange agreement effective May 18th among the company COVID Technologies and the security holders of COVID Technologies. Now, pursuant to the terms of the definitive agreement and in consideration of the acquisition, the company has issued to the former COVID Technologies security holders an aggregate of 16,500,000 common shares of the company at a deemed price of 0.08 cents per, 8 cents per consideration share, and an aggregate of 16 million replacement warrants for a price of 10 cents for a period in up to April 28th. Now, additionally, effective upon closing of the acquisition, Harveer Singh Sindhu has been appointed to the company's board of directors. So really for Micron Waste Technologies, I've talked about them a bunch in the past. They were a company that I was really hoping would pick up a lot more traction than they did, just for their, I believe it's called the Carnivore technology that they've created. But basically they have a lot of different technology formats that are out there for dealing with the excess cannabis biomass from coming out of these large-scale production facilities. Again, really wasn't massively adopted, and they have had obviously some sales, and they have worked with a few of these licensed producers, but again, really didn't pick up to the extent that I was hoping for. Now they have the full acquisition of COVID Technologies Incorporated, which was a company that came out focusing on obviously the sanitizer and different COVID-based technologies and products that everyone's been pumping out right now. So similar to a lot of these other companies, Relivium and Neptune Wellness as well, who have also really benefited from adapting to the COVID-19 pandemic and also dealing with a lot of the new norms for sanitation and health and cleanliness that are out there today. So they've really been quick to adapt and make these products available. Both those companies have benefited a little bit faster than Micron Waste Technologies will through this COVID Technologies deal, but still is a step in the right direction. Although, again, this is really based off of the anticipation that there's going to be secondary surges of COVID-19. Obviously, in the U.S. right now, we're seeing a lot of surges, so probably in the right there. But when looking at it on a global scale, there might not be the need or demand for some of those sanitation products that people were originally anticipating maybe a few months back. But I think that this is a smart play for any of the smaller cannabis technology-based companies to have basically a backup of revenue during this time period, and also be able to be sort of forward-thinking and show that they can be very liquid when it comes to dealing with these problems and sort of where the market trends are going. So next we're looking at small company Gallery Brands with cannabis industry veterans Angelina Blest and Dum Duong and Riley Starr, who have officially launched Gallery Brands. Now, this is a house of brands founded by the experienced and trusted legacy market leaders, which will provide superior quality, precisely dosed, and expertly curated cannabis products to the Canadian market. The team has worked coast to coast over 15 years collectively with the Canadian cannabis industry to develop products focused on quality and care, and under Gallery Brands, they're excited to bring their legacy and market products to the regulated market. And navigating the world of cannabis can be overwhelming to the Canadian consumer, especially with the number of new brands popping up to ride the latest trend, only to disappear just as quickly. So with their experience, the Gallery team has simplified the process of discovery by ignoring the noise and focusing on their vast product and cannabis industry knowledge. And their carefully curated portfolio is geared towards a wide range of consumers, from the canna-curious testing the waters of the cannabis market for the first time to the seasoned connoisseur searching for the fluent subject matter OG experts. For Blessed, our brand philosophy is simple and authentic to my own lifestyle as a competitive Muay Thai fighter and someone who has been consuming and creating my own cannabis products for years. Train, treat, repeat. As a competitive athlete, I am always focused on taking care of my body, which includes what I put into it, and I care deeply about the quality of cannabis and products that myself and individuals are consuming and having available to them. And above and beyond the blessed line of products, I'm most excited about shedding light on the benefits of full spectrum cannabis oil, which has a wide range of benefits, including healing properties and vitamins, both of which are essential during intense recovery, said Angelino Bless, the founder of Bless. Bringing the little pharma products to the regulated market has been a labor of love. We've been doing this for years, and the team are passionate about life sciences, experimentation, and innovation. And with this in mind, we're able to come to the market with unique premium science and lab-backed formulations, said Dom Duong, the co-founder of Little Pharma. So the three Gallery Brands founders have all come together to formulate a fourth brand, Cala, which will be the first of many in-house calibrations. Cala carries the tribe's combined 15 years of expertise and adoration for the plant, aligned with Gallery Brand's uncompromising commitment to quality. Cala offers the perfect blend for the perfect moment, and Cala is cannabis for all. So the Gallery portfolio will include chocolates, oils, bottled tea, oil capsules, vape pens, gummies, and infused spring water. And with Legacy Roots, Gallery Brands represents craftsmanship, culture, and curation. So another house of brands coming out to the Canadian cannabis market. And the only reason I really address this today, obviously, I'm sure that they will create some pretty great products, but it's really just showing the trend that we've seen. There are several other announcements over the last week and over the last months as well of very similar companies popping up into the both Canadian and US based cannabis markets today. And you're going to probably continue to see that over the next year, as now that we've seen the investor world of the cannabis industry really start to level out a little bit more, and you're starting to see that obviously the companies that have gone public are either flourishing or struggling right now. A lot of them have sort of figured out what they need to do to maintain sort of a proper cash flow and positive balance sheet, whereas others are really struggling to maintain those sales or to get into this industry in any meaningful way. But you're really starting to see a little bit more consistency and solidarity within the cannabis investment world today. Obviously, there's a lot of issues in the investment world total right now, again, and will continue to be over the next year due to all the COVID-19 closures. But realistically, it's a little bit more consistent than it's been over the last 2 years. Whereas for the private sector, there's a lot of new growth and a lot of new companies coming out, and a lot of people are realizing that it's actually not that difficult as it seems, as regulations have alleviated a little bit, and also as people now have a recipe to follow. That's the biggest thing we have to look at for both the US and Canada, as well as any markets that are expanding into the cannabis industry today, is that now that we're starting to see what an established market looks like, we're starting to see what's needed for retail infrastructure, we're starting to see what's needed for a brand to develop. These companies now have the opportunity to look at what's missing, find new niches, and build upon that. And I think the way you're going to see, and this is something I've been talking about for quite some time, is again a real craft movement within the cannabis industry, especially in Canada. Again, it's just following suit from what we've seen in the beer industry, the wine industry, and any other really craft markets that have shown up in the last couple of years and really dominated or started to really impact, at least maybe not dominate's the right word, but as you've seen within the alcohol industry, craft brands have started to impact the sales of the large scale producers, and that's why a lot of them have bought up these brands, and that really does seem to be what a lot of these companies are probably aiming for, is to create these small boutique houses of brands and then eventually either have some heavy investment support or financial support from a larger company who wants to absorb them into their large scale house of brands, or possibly to scale up and become, at least national throughout the country. But as we've seen, there's a lot of difficulties with doing that. So I think that what you'll start to see is a lot of these companies maintain privacy, and then again get absorbed into some of these larger houses of brands that are out there. Speaking of houses of brands, next we'll look at Canopy Rivers, whose portfolio companies have made recent announcements as they aim to introduce new and expanded choices for cannabis consumers and medical patients to Canada and the US. We continue to be impressed with the ability of our portfolio companies to represent to shifting consumer demands in the cannabis space while executing on the long-term strategies, said Narbe Alexandrian, the president and CEO of Canopy Rivers. We still see greenified and Canadian brand market, and we are excited to see both AgriFarm and Dinelio taking steps to introduce Canadians to brands that they've proven track records in the U.S. markets. So Dinelio, an Edmonton-based manufacturer of cannabis-infused gummies, signed the first letter of intent with Pantry, a California-based edibles brand that says it has bridged the worlds of culinary arts, cannabis, and wellness. And the agreement follows Daniella's receipt of its processing license from the Health Canada and marks Pantry's first international expansion beyond the U.S. So I talked about that a little while ago. AgriFarm received a license amendment from Health Canada to allow for the sale of dried cannabis extracts, edibles, and topicals. And that amendment enables AgriFarm to exercise its exclusive rights to introduce brands from Slang Worldwide and Greenhouse Seed Co. to the Canadian market, as well as TerraSend Corp. Opened its third retail dispensary location in Pennsylvania. Jason Ackerman, TerraSend's CEO, noted that this third apothecarium location signals the company's commitment to local patients at the state's medical program and continues to grow. And this newly renovated 5,000 square foot medical dispensary is designed to enhance patient experience and features private consultation rooms, highly trained staff, a wide variety of products, and options for online ordering. So again, Canopy Rivers, I've talked about a bunch in the past. There's a bunch of interviews you can check out with Narbe Alexandrian if you haven't listened to them in the past. But this is a company that I've really liked their approach to how they're dealing with this industry of, again, creating a portfolio of brands to all work together in a sort of Canopy Rivers ecosystem. And we've seen that now, again, other companies that are smaller or looking at the Canopy Rivers sort of business portfolio plan are now starting to take note and, again, starting to create their own house of brands or ecosystems that can help support each other and really sustain themselves, as opposed to trying to create these giant vertically integrated companies. Again, that's all you heard about for the first couple of years within the cannabis industry was vertical integration. The company needs to be able to do everything from seed to sale. And as we've seen, that has worked for some of the larger scale companies that are big enough to support that and have the finances behind them. But even they have started to struggle over the last year or so. And again, their products have also struggled in that it's really hard to maintain quality and consistency in this market that is so competitively aggressive, and where every single company is focused on creating the best product. Every single one of them boasts the same type of mantra, if you will. And you can see this from any of their corporate websites or from any of the private websites. Really, any company in the cannabis business today pretty much boasts the same type of information, which is we're creating a premium brand product. It's all about the consumers. We want to create the best thing that's available. We care about quality. We have a dedicated team. All of those things, everyone's saying the same thing. So how do you really separate yourselves? Well, you have to be experts and focus on how to do what you can do the best, and actually what that best is, what the actual real standards are. Because I think that for a lot of these people, they haven't went out and tried and tested a lot of these products that are from their competitors, and so they're going in blind to a lot of these situations, which is why I do like the idea of the gallery brands, as these are people who have obviously tested and played with a lot of different products out there. So hopefully the products they're bringing to market are really a good marker of what the actual standards are. Because again, if everyone's saying that they're the best, that's impossible. So obviously there needs to be some people who are better or worse at this. And again, we've seen some premium cannabis brands from smaller producers really stand and beat the shit out of a lot of these large scale producers' products. And I think you're going to see more and more of that as time continues on. And I think that the better strategy you're going to start to see within the cannabis space is to have a series of expert focused companies all working together for the same goal, as opposed to one gigantic conglomerate trying to do a million different things really well. I don't think that that's possible. I don't think you can get that many experts all together under one roof very easily and conduct that business very well. So again, I do think that that's going to be the shift you're going to continue to see over the next few months and years in the cannabis industry, until it does become more of like a craft beer, craft wine market. That really is what we've seen in Canada today. Speaking of Canada as well, Canada may now need to consider new risk-based approaches to regulate and tax innovative tobacco products differently than cigarettes to help the country's 4.5 million smokers quit entirely or switch to better alternatives than cigarettes, says Rothmans, Benson, and Hedges. As they said today. Now, risk-based regulation, when coupled with technological innovation and scientific substantiation, can be a formula for public health breakthrough in both reducing the prevalence of smoking in society and converting those who have otherwise continued to smoke to scientifically substantiate better alternatives, said RBH as well. Now, RBH calls for the action after a historic decision this week by the U.S. Food and Drug Administration authorized the marketing of IQOS as a modified risk tobacco product in the U.S. Now, in doing so, the agency found that an IQOS exposure modification order is appropriate to promote public health. IQOS is available for sale in Canada, produced by RBH's parent company, Philip Morris International, as part of a portfolio of innovations intended to reduce both the exposure and potential harm for smoking cigarettes. The FDA authorized the marketing of IQOS with the following information. The IQOS system heats tobacco but does not burn it. This significantly reduces the production of harmful and potentially harmful chemicals. And scientific studies have shown that switching completely from conventional cigarettes to the IQOS system reduces your body's exposure to harmful or potentially harmful chemicals. And the FDA concluded that the available scientific evidence demonstrates that the IQOS is expected to benefit the health of the population as a whole, taking into account both users of tobacco products and persons who do not currently use tobacco products. And the FDA's decision provides an important example of how governments, industry, and health stakeholders can incorporate a harm reduction mindset to regulate smoke-free alternatives to differentiate them from cigarettes in order to protect and promote public health. So obviously, this is coming from Philip Morris. You can read the attached news release. This is basically bullshit for a couple of reasons. The obvious one is that the IQOS is pretty much just a cannabis dry herb vaporizer that's been modified for tobacco. There's really no difference at all. There's a million products like this already out in the market, and all of them, at least within Canada, are being taxed under the new vape regulations, which is quite heavy. It's about a 25% tax for most of your vape related products, and that's for both e-cigarettes and even cannabis vape products. So there's a couple of things that definitely you should pay attention to over the next coming year or so with regards to Canada and the US and regards to the vape regulations and laws. So this FDA decision here could open things up a little bit more regarding some of the taxes and regulations in the US surrounding the vape industry, though they are very different than the Canadian taxes and regulations surrounding that same industry. Another big sort of factor of today is that the Canadian and US governments are not exactly simpatico. And this sort of comment of FDA approval in the US would somehow impact the Canadian government today, possibly every other time in history, but possibly not today. Again, the COVID-19 tensions between Canada and US are quite heightened these days. The borders still remain closed. There's a lot of different difficulties going on between those two governments, and I would expect that the US trying to promote anything of we've done a good job of this, so you should follow our style is not going to sit very well with most Canadian officials today. So I also think that's Philip Morris really misunderstanding the relationship and tensions going on between those two governments today and how one will probably not relate to the other. And another big issue here for me is that, again, from Philip Morris, this is a straight up bullshit product. They should not be boasting this, or it also shows obviously how manipulated the FDA is in that they would approve the marketing and the standards for this IQOS system without obviously comparing it to all the other products that are out there that are being taxed and scrutinized heavily as tobacco related products. And again, this technology is not that new. There's really nothing innovative or interesting about this product that they've made, other than, again, it's specifically branded for tobacco products. You could pretty much use any dry herb vaporizer for the cannabis industry today, probably for your tobacco products. It would just get very grungy. So hopefully they've maybe dealt with some of the cleaning situations of it. I've looked at it. It doesn't look very impressive as an overall product. But it would be interesting to note that possibly at least Canada or the US, or both hopefully, would start to now consider that, again, when people are trying to quit cigarettes or quit smoking tobacco, it is difficult to go cold turkey for many of these consumers. And as I've personally seen from many people firsthand, that a lot of people do benefit from going to the vape technology as they can slowly start weaning themselves off at a regulated pace. The main benefit of the vape industry that I've seen, at least for the tobacco side of it, is that you can start alleviating your dosage. Obviously, it's a little bit more difficult and less precise to be going from one pack to then reducing it by maybe one cigarette a day. Obviously, it's a very visual way to do it, but it's a lot harder to actually maintain and properly dose yourself. Whereas with the vape products that are out there, you can go down to lower and lower nic strength devices. So eventually you could be starting at your 50 milligram or 6 milligram vape juices and going down to 10, 20, or down to 0 eventually would be the idea there. Obviously, it also offers a lot of different flavor options, so people can start associating this with different habits. hopefully, and eventually turn to some sort of juice or beverage laden sort of substitute. But definitely something to pay attention to over the next year or so of what continues to happen surrounding the laws that start to regulate vape and tobacco products and how that does impact the cannabis industry. Because if you're paying attention to even like a product like a Volcano, the Volcano Hybrid, for instance, has been taxed the same as a lot of these tobacco vape products. And that is because there isn't a very good differentiation between those products as far as use and as far as really what they are and what industries they fall into. So I would hope that what you start to see is a little bit more separation from cannabis and tobacco. Again, within the US right now, this shows that there is obviously still massive sway for tobacco over cannabis products, as again, this product just got viewed as a modified risk tobacco product, but we have so many difficulties, and there still is basically no FDA approved cannabis products because it's still a US illegal substance. So again, a lot of hypocrisy and craziness going on in this release here, but something to pay attention to with how those two industries are going to continue to impact each other, and how one obviously needs to be start looking at as a lot more separate from the other. Lastly, looking at Acreage Holdings, who today announced that the Massachusetts Cannabis Control Commission has granted the company provisional licenses for the retail sale of adult use cannabis in Worcester and Shrewsbury. Acreage will add adult use retail sales to its existing The Botanist dispensary in Worcester, which will open as a medical marijuana treatment center, which opened as a medical marijuana treatment center in 2018, and will open as a new The Botanist dispensary in Shrewsbury, Massachusetts. Now, the CCC voted to grant the provisional licenses at its monthly meeting earlier today. Now, Acreage anticipates beginning retail sales at both locations as quickly as possible, following further regulatory inspections and approval. And the Worcester dispensary is located, now you don't need to know the locations, you can look that up in the article or again in the news release from Acreage Holdings. So once all the approvals are completed and the dispensaries are fully operational, Acreage anticipates adding more than 40 new jobs in Massachusetts. Now, separately at today's CCC meeting, the commissioner approved a stipulated agreement in which Acreage has agreed to make a $250,000 payment to the Cannabis Control Commission Regulatory Fund. And the payment is related to previously terminated management services agreements. And with today's action, Acreage looks forward to completing the licensing process and bringing the Commonwealth citizens its full house of brands product portfolio, including the Botanist, Live Resin, and Tweed brands, the latter being a Cannabis growth brand that Acreage introduced in the U.S. last year. So Acreage Holdings obviously expanding into Massachusetts. Recreational sales, which Massachusetts has been a very difficult market when you've paid attention to it over the last couple of months. There's a lot of companies there that are really struggling to maintain within that market, but some who are really succeeding. And obviously Acreage Holdings now getting a little bit more groundwork there. And why it's important really to pay attention to Acreage Holdings at all is because obviously they're connected with Cannabis Growth. Mentioned in the end there of Cannabis Growth's Tweed brand being introduced to the U.S. through Acreage Holdings. And you're going to see more and more of that as Acreage and Cannabis work together to start to do basically the opposite of what many Canadian companies are doing now. Speaking of Cannabis Rivers, who I talked about earlier, bringing U.S. brands to the Canadian market. Cannabis Growth now through Acreage is working on the opposite of that end of the spectrum, and that they're trying to start bringing their Cannabis Growth, Tweed brands, and all the other house of brands that are under the Cannabis Growth sort of portfolio into the U.S. as slowly and as sort of registered as possible. And I think that that's going to be a smart strategy, but again, it's still very dependent on one big thing for the U.S., which is federal legalization. Until that does happen, you're just going to continue to see this sort of side dealing through Acreage and Cannabis Growth. But obviously, that is the big anticipation for that company, and they're very much betting on the long game that either within the next couple of elections, there will be a vote for federal legalization of cannabis in the U.S. There's still a lot of debate about if that'll ever go through, and if also the cannabis industry within the U.S. will allow that to go through, as they stand to lose the most from some of these companies like a Cannabis Growth and the other larger international conglomerates entering into their space and really starting to take out some of the U.S.-based businesses. That's all for today's podcast. Enjoy the rest of your weekend. That's all for today's podcast. Podcast is now a certified word trademark on the blockchain through Cognate Incorporated CM certification. InvestorIdeas.com podcasts are also available on iTunes, Spotify, Google Play Music, Stitcher, iHeartRadio, Spreaker, and TuneIn. If you'd like to be a guest or sponsor of this podcast, please contact InvestorIdeas.com. Investor Ideas reminds all listeners to read our disclaimers and disclosures on the investorideas.com website, and this podcast is not an endorsement to buy products or services or securities. Investors are reminded that all investments involve risk and possible loss of investment. Investor Ideas does not condone the use of cannabis except where permissible by law. Our site does not possess, distribute, or sell cannabis products.